So let's bring to you now the perspectives of 3 experienced practitioners. And we will have time at the end. We're building in times for questions. So as you think of questions for any of the folks you hear from over the next half hour, please share them in the chat, and we'll make sure we get those queued up so that we can get your questions asked. Nicole, why don't you introduce our first guest?
Surely. So as I highlighted earlier, in our research and preparation for this event, we established that the term digital employee experience means different things to different people. These perspectives were fascinating. We spoke to lots and lots of people, and the next session gives a selection of these practitioners looking at the digital employee experience through these different lenses. So first up is Neil Morgan. Neil is a digital workplace advisor with over 15 years of experience solving business challenges related to internal communications and information management. He's got a focus on the user experience. His background in developing and managing corporate intranets crosses several different types of business, from non-profit organizations to consumer goods companies, primarily working closely with communications, marketing, and IT teams around the world. I'm sure lots of you on this call will resonate with that. So Neil, I know that you're focused on increasing discussion around DEX inside the organizations that you work with and highlighting the benefits of a user-centered approach. Have you found organizations to be more open to these ideas?
Hi, Nicole, and hi, everyone that's on the call today. So I think in short, to answer that question, yes and no. I think it's one of those situations where, I think the era of UX is still not here, I would say. If we think about the user themselves, I think UX, obviously, for a lot of people on the call, they will understand that more as a kind of design stage of most of their projects. And in my experience, what I've found over the last 15 years, I would say, not to date myself too much, but is really this shift from, a kind of user perspective around web usability, human-computer interaction is how it was called back then. And that's where I, kind of had that first experience of taking the user perspective with a book that I read, called Don't Make Me Think, by a guy named Steve Krug. And that really, I think, helped to shift my mindset just from my own perspective in managing an intranet to saying, okay, it's less about, what platform we're running and more about what people are trying to do. So really taking this task-based approach. And what I've seen is an evolution of this task-based perspective really ramping up in, I would say about 10 years ago in the customer experience realm. And I think I was very fortunate to work with a team on the digital workplace, but I was not sitting in IT and I was not sitting in communications. I was sitting in a digital team. And we built that digital team to really represent the kind of digital journey, if you wish, in building a product, understanding the user, understanding what you're asking the user to do, and looking at how they're, succeeding on that journey. And quickly, I translated that perspective from the customer experience into the, employee experience. And what I've found is that when you look at it from an employee perspective, the role of the intranet, which I think most people on the call, that's what we're trying to figure out, is what role does the intranet play for our company, tends to come from the employees and less so from the senior management or the corporate office. And I think without that perspective of the end user, you're really just kind of rolling something out that you're hoping will work for the majority of people in your organization.
Okay. So when you said you worked in that digital team, when was that? How was that quite early on for most organizations? Because I mean, everybody's at different stages in this journey, so it's quite interesting to see when that was.
About 10 years ago, where I had the opportunity to do firsthand research. So I think when you start one of these digital workplace projects, first thing we all want to do is to kind of have some marker in the sand of where are we now. And typically you want to try and run a survey. I think the survey is always good just to be able to say, what is the current reach of communications across the company? That's always, quite telling. But also in terms of the feedback that you're building and an opportunity to actually speak to employees. And that's what I found most valuable is that moment where you can take, 30 minutes to talk with someone about their experience with the current intranet and the things that they are trying to do really helps to build this task-based approach to looking at the intranet. And more, what you're able to then, see is some trends in terms of the general things people do, and I'm sure for most people who've been managing intranets for over 10 years or so, the common things, jump to the top, such as the lunch menu or, the shuttle bus schedule, things like this. But again, it's not to put those things down. It's just to say that, but that's really the core content that people are looking for in those moments. Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the key things that you learn from running surveys, interviews, and talking with people is you start to hit some real pain points.
Yeah, so it's always the simple things that people are looking for and the things that just help them in their day-to-day. So do you think, when you're looking at making DEX improvements, are you really looking at the employee journey then, like looking at the day in the life of an employee and working through those journeys?
So I think that's the tricky part. And, every company will have to approach this the way they can manage it, is, my view on that. Because I think if you, again, this whole concept around digital workplace is still relatively new. And I think the challenge there is when you want to try and introduce a digital workplace approach inside your company, as soon as some, senior managers hear the word digital work, what? Sounds like digital transformation. We paid Accenture, hundreds of thousands and we got nothing out of it. So go away. And I think that's one of the things we have to kind of overcome to say, okay, we're not necessarily here to solve everything. I'm not going to boil an ocean. But if we take that perspective of digital transformation, that brought us some sense of what are the important points when we talk about a customer? The essential question, how much do we want to pay to acquire one more customer? If we look at that from the employee experience, what we're seeing is that more and more of the tools that people use, as we've just been seeing in the chat at the end of Kevin's session, are really becoming online, mobile, portable. Work is what I do, not where I go. That's kind of the motto that I tend to push to say, when you look at the employee experience in that journey, it's becoming more digital. So if we can identify the touch points that people have during their week, during their day, during the month, the first 3 months, whatever, you start to build a view of what is that digital employee experience look like for somebody sitting in a corporate office, somebody working on the front line, and you start to have that perspective of saying, okay, it's not about just pushing more content, but it's actually about understanding the tasks they're trying to achieve and how easy it is for them to do that.
That's really great, Neil. And there's lots of questions I can ask you about that and I'm sure our people on the chat will have some as well, but we'll hold them for the question and answer session that we have coming up. But thanks very much for that input. That was great.
Sure, happy to.
All right.
Over to you then, Ted.
Sorry, yeah. Let's go to our next guest. David Michael, I will confess, was my manager back in 2008 when I first got to know him. But for more relevant to the rest of you, is he's the former CTO at the Startup Football League XFL, where they completed the first 20 games of their inaugural season in the spring of 2020. Sadly, due to COVID-19, the league was forced to suspend operations and shut down. David was previously CIO at the Madison Square Garden Company, CIO at the advertising powerhouse Group M, part of WPP, and CIO at UBM, now part of Informa, the world's largest B2B trade show organizer. David, thanks so much for joining us today. You bring the perspective of a senior IT leader to our discussion. So let's start by learning, a little bit about what you think CIOs and CTOs are focused on these days. Where does the digital employee experience rank on their priority list?
Thanks very much for asking me to join today, Ted. Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation, and from sort of the person in charge of technology in an organization, the employee experience is actually an important one. If I think about the two key audiences that I would serve in an organization, one is obviously the customer, the paying customer, to make sure that we've got good products and services. And technology plays a big part in that in every organization. But equally so, the employee experience is just as important, if not more so. I'm always struck by the fact that Richard Branson always puts employees first and customers second, and says if you look after your employees well, then they will look after your customers. And I think there's a lot of truth to be said in that. And as a CIO, the thing which I never want to hear is employees complaining about the tools that they have to do their jobs. That's always a bad place to come from. So it often is not the number one on the list. Truth be told, often number one on the list is the customer experience. And certainly these days, security, information security is another really important thing. But I would say it's definitely up there. It's definitely a top three, and that certainly has been for me, that employee experience and the tool set that they have around that, the technical tool sets, critically important.
Yep, I think we all know all too well the pain of tools and just taking where you were going there in terms of the proliferation of tools. So many, great tools, but there's so many of them, and it can be, and of course some of them aren't so great either. So looking at the wide array and all the things going on, and even just the developments that have happened so accelerated through, so many people working at home, lots of IT departments have really taken lots of responsive action. But what's your perspective? Do we really have any hope of reducing this pain anytime soon? Or is this just, we're going to have to live with it this way for a long time?
It's a tough one, isn't it? When I look at my budget, I see some very big items at the very top where you're spending millions of dollars, and then I see a massive long tail of lots of small things that we're using, and each of those is a cost, and also comes with an overhead and a headache. And the question is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? And my philosophy has always been that, provided the tool is really giving somebody some value, it's helping them to do their job, and there isn't something else that we've got in our tool set, then it's actually a good thing. And if we've got a large number of them, it probably means we're not trying hard enough to work out which are the tools which are failing our customers, that could be configured in a different way to work and give them the value that they need. Why is it that somebody is not using the corporate OneDrive and feeling that it's important to go and buy a box or a Dropbox subscription on their corporate credit card? Well, maybe the reason why they're doing it is because they're not allowed to share content externally. So let's think about, how do we allow people to share internally and externally in a secure fashion, and take a considered view. Is that two tools or is that one tool? And there's no necessarily right answer, but it's thinking about it and thinking it through to making sure that we've got the right tool set. And I love when the previous speakers was talking about, well, help people understand which tool to use for which task. That's often a real challenge, isn't it? When you've got so many different tools, and in a large organization, it can really happen that you've just got so many of them. If you've got Slack, and you've got Microsoft Teams, and you've got Dropbox, which tool do I use for which task? And helping people to understand which is designed for which use case, really important thing to do. So I think that what's really important, the way I like to think about this is sort of, what's the Uber problem here and what's the way to solve it? And I don't think it's about individual tools. What it is what is our approach to managing our tool set? And we're always going to have an ecosystem of tools. And what we need is a really solid and robust process around discovering what tools we're using, which tools are sort of validated by the enterprise, and which ones are shadow IT, which is a tool you often hear these days. Where people have just gone and bought it and stuck it on their corporate credit card. And what's the process around deciding which things we're going to support and encourage and drive people towards, and which are the ones we're going to just take a look at and decide, well, why is it that somebody's gone out and they've decided to go and start using Asana for a particular workflow when we've got this other tool over here that could be better? Well, maybe actually that tool isn't any good and Asana is a better one. So what we need is a process around discovering the tools, supporting the tools, and bringing them to life inside our organization.
Yeah, I love how we're coming back to it's not all the technology, you know, it's not like there's always a technology solution for these things. And what I hear you saying is it's a process, it's a management kind of solution. Governance would be another term. It's a lot of things that people can tackle without, you know, needing to do any coding and no developing or, you know, all that stuff. Obviously, one of the reasons we asked you to join this, David, is you know, you have a, you know, what I would describe as an enlightened view of, you know, very employee-centric, you know, as a senior IT leader. I bet there are a lot of people on this call who are wondering, you know, how can I get my, you know, CIO or CTO to support me in this way, or to see things this way? What's your best advice for people, how they can try to get that kind of support and that they need to make initiatives and really improve the digital employee experience?
Well, I think two things that every CIO is going to care about is security and governance. So that's a good place to start. It's a really good place to start the conversation. Tool proliferation impacts both of those things. Every CIO is always worried about shadow IT. Every CIO is always worried about information security. And information security is just getting more and more complex. It's not only is somebody hacking into my data, is my employee accidentally making data available to people who shouldn't have access to it? Are we complying with regulation? And regulation is only getting more complex. Even if you're a US-based company, the European GDPR around personal privacy rules often apply. And now with the CCPA, the California data privacy rules, which came into effect in January this year, those impact every organization in the US. You're bound to have a customer in California or an employee in California. So you care about these things, let alone if you've got health information, so HIPAA comes into place, or credit card information with PCI. So information security and data governance, two very important things. Good place to start the conversation with your CIO or CTO to see what their views are, what their worries are. And the truth be told, you can actually bring a lot to the table to help address those issues by getting clarity around what the tools are that we're using, to help ensure that the tools that we're using conform to our governance and information security protocols will be a huge asset from the beginning. Here's a great example of something which every CIO is talking about today, and that is, how do people literally log on to the tool? And if you haven't got single sign-on with two-factor authentication, you're pretty sure you're going to have it very soon. So making sure that all of your tools will support your enterprise-wide single sign-on, multi-factor, two-factor authentication system, absolutely critical. So if you start using the language that your CIO, CTO cares about, you're instantly going to get their attention and they're going to want to talk about it. So I think that is sort of your opening gambit for the conversation.
That's excellent. David, I could talk to you all afternoon, but we're going to keep moving. I really appreciate you joining us, and we'll be coming up with questions in just a moment. Nicole, let's turn to our third practitioner guest here.
Yes, thanks, Ted. So next in this session, we have Jay Graff. Jay is a member of JM Family's Associate Experience team, which is focused on modernizing the digital experience employees interact with on a daily basis. I know that in Jay's organization, they call employees associates. So JM Family is an automotive company consistently ranked by Fortune as one of the 100 best companies to work for. So Jay must definitely be doing something right. Thanks for being with us today, Jay. Can you give us your perspective?
Yeah, my perspective. So yeah, so JM Family, as you mentioned, we're the Toyota distributor to 75 states is our primary business, and we do have a very strong culture and sense of, associates are our number one asset. That is repeated over and over and over again. And I know a lot of companies say that, but when you're here, you really do feel that the associates are what's most important. And so in this role of this digital, experience strategy that I'm working in now, we've been taking a look at what is the experience that our associates have on a day-to-day basis. What are all the tools? We know, people have to wear two hats. I like to talk about that they're the hat of doing their job, but also the hat of just being a good associate. What are all the things that they need to do to be a good associate, from their time to their expenses to their performance reviews to their, anything else, any type of requests or policies, procedures, etc. And what are we putting people through just to be a good associate? So I'm not even looking at the digital experience from what they do on a day-to-day, their job, those point solutions that they might be using, but what are we putting them through? How are we inhibiting their productivity possibly because of all these other things that we're asking them to do just to be a good associate? How hard is it to, and I'm not even just talking about applications, but how hard is it to log into the conference room technology? What's it like to pay in the cafeteria or badge in to office building? And then now all this remote stuff as well, and to collaborate there. But then of course, all the, tons of tools that we have and applications that we have that are completely disparate and don't work together, and different user experiences across the board that we just expect people to know about and to use. And of course we brand everything, something, that whatever department that rolled it out thought was cute at the moment. But if you're a new hire, God bless you. I don't know how you would know that, that what we call that is what it actually is. And so that's what I'm looking at. And how do we improve that? How do we make that simpler? How do we get out of the way of our associates so they can continue to be more productive?
I thought that was really interesting, that you're looking at, the simple tasks, and not actually how people do their job, but just how they actually get through their day as an employee. Because a lot of people are maybe looking at the bigger things. So that's an interesting perspective, So I know that until fairly recently, your role was a bit more limited, wasn't it? I think people will be interested in hearing how you moved from being a community manager of your company's sort of social intranet into this broader digital employee experience role. And I know you took quite a lot of initiative there, and they're probably at a similar stage as you were then.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And that's where I know Ted, and I actually scrolled through some of the people that are participants on here and see some familiar names from my past community management roles. So, as I mentioned, I was always part of this associate experience team, or not always, but in the last few years, and that's where this community management role lived as well, and which was really our social intranet. It was is what I managed, and is the internet for the whole company. But it was also a social application where people, it gave people a voice as well, and we ran all these different programs to do that with Ask Me Anythings, or questions of the month, or you name it. And that's where we communicated to our associates as well. But I started to identify that we have a ton of programs, corporate-wide programs that were going on at the same time, and are still going on. This big move from Google to Microsoft. We're knocking down buildings and building new buildings on our main campus and other locations. We're looking at, what is our internet of the future, and what do we do with that? And so many other things that are going on that were all, again, disparate, but very impactful to our associates. On a day-to-day basis. We were throwing a lot at them. And so I started to think about it, nobody's thinking about this from the associate perspective. What's the impact to the associate? Thinking about all of these things that we're throwing at them. We were thinking about it from the perspective of whoever was rolling it out, whether it was facilities, with these new buildings, with IT for the Google transition to Microsoft, et cetera. And nobody thinking about it from that central person, that associate perspective of what are we doing to them? How are we impacting them? And from that digital perspective, not just the digital perspective, but bigger than that as well. But I started to kind of identify this and start to talk to some of the leadership about this, and that we need to start thinking about this, and putting the associate in the middle and thinking about it from their perspective, so that we can, again, what I mentioned before, get out of their way and make a better experience for them and not make things harder. So I started
I was going to say, probably you're going to answer that. I was going to say, how did you persuade your management to do that? But you were probably going to answer that question.
Yeah. So I put together this story, really, and the timing was right, because we had a reorg in HR. We had a new CIO come in. We had some, a couple of key things happened at the right time that helped me. But really, I put together this story that walked people through what the current experience is and what it should be and what it could look like, and just gave some simple stories around that turn the lights on for people. Like I would give the Uber story, where I mentioned before that we're Toyota, and so at our locations, we have several different locations, but at those locations we have extra cars that we call pool cars, that instead of having to rent a car when you're traveling, you can just get one of the pool cars. And I like to give the example of what you would put up with inside your organization, you would not put up with that experience outside your organization. So the example I would use in my storytelling with trying to sell this was the Uber example of, you pull up Uber, it knows who you are, it knows where you are, it knows how you're going to pay. You just have to tell it where you want to go, and you're off in 5 minutes. Well, to get a pool car, first of all, you had to know that it's called a pool car. But to get a pool car, we have to go to the internet. You have to search it. That launches you off into SharePoint 2010, by the way. So a 10-year-old, which pulls up an info path form that asks you, what's your first name? What's your last name? What location are you from? These are all things it should know about you. You wouldn't put up with that externally. And so I didn't even have to say that. I just tell them the Uber side, and then I just say, what's it like to get a pool car? And the light would go on, like, oh, I get it. That is not a great experience.
That's great, actually, because a lot of people in chat have been talking about bringing it to life, bringing this to life in the organization, and right. You've done that exactly there. So it's a question of like finding stories that resonate with senior management in the organization, and having those light bulb moments, really having them sort of see that they need to make these changes. So that's really, really good. I know that we've got lots of questions coming in. So Ted, should we go to questions now?
Yeah, I'm basically, I'm not able to keep up with all the stuff in the chat, but I wish I could, because it looks like there's a lot of great dialogue going on in there. But I did see a question that Ernst posted, and I want to just say it on air so we can let Jay and Neil and David, hear it and hear their take on it. So basically, the question was, with digital workplace solutions being now in the cloud, how much can we still influence DEX, or the digital employee experience, from pure technology standpoint? Is there been a shift there that's making this a change? Either of you guys want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, happy to take that one. I think that the cloud is such a great thing. It really allows organizations to move a lot quicker and not have to worry about the nuts and bolts of how do I get this thing working. It allows you to put your toes in the water quickly, try something out, and if it works well, press the accelerator. And if it fails, it's not good, you can turn it down, and you haven't spent too much money. So yeah, cloud I think is a great enabler. It's a great accelerator to try things out.
I think the cloud can also get in the way also as well, because now it's so easy for people to just, like was mentioned before, grab the corporate credit card and let's try this out. And that's how we get this proliferation of so many different tools that makes it tough. So we have to think about, how do we get people on board with what we're trying to do in terms of this, this unified experience if possible. and not just keep doing all these one-offs. It makes it tricky. It's good, and it's pros and cons.
Neil, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to, I think, following up a little bit from what Jay was, just mentioning in terms of what are the challenges. One, I think that I've come across quite often is this assumption that the experience is going to be the same for everyone. I'm currently living in Europe where data plans are, woohoo, plenty of data. I know in the US, it's a much different story, especially if you're trying to use a corporate phone and trying to access some of these tools. They may not pay your data charges, or it may be extremely expensive, even here in Europe. And especially the company I'm working for right now, where in Africa, especially in South Africa, we pay the data cost for the employees to be able to access these tools. So I think it's not just a simple point of saying throw the solutions into the cloud. I think the point that I picked up from what Ernst was talking about was just the sense of how do we know what we're giving them will work and be more effective than what they're currently doing. And that's why I go back to that sense of the interview, and at least having probably focus groups, which will highlight some of the challenges when people are trying to work with the current process, as well as having that opportunity to discuss what that ideal process looks like and how that can be digitized and what parts of it can be done in the cloud. So I think it's not just a pure and simple buy that app in the cloud and you're off and
running. Nicole, have you got a question you were ready to read out?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So Gillian has a question that she's posted in chat, and lots of people have chimed in. So they have, lots of people are thinking about this or struggling with this in their organization. So it'd be good to get a perspective from each of you on this. So she's saying, has anyone managed to get DEX or something similar uncoupled from a traditional organization structure? So i.e. have you been able to get DEX out of HR or IT or engineering and to have it go across all the different functions? She says that DEX impacts everything, and she feels she's often held back by being a child of a more traditional structure. And as I said before, lots of people have resonated with that and saying that they're struggling with that too. Now, I know that obviously Jay has broken out of that somewhat, and you're sort of looking at it from that overarching perspective. And I think that David has got examples of that as well in organisations that he's worked with. So have you got any tips really for Gillian and Patty and Keely and other people that have commented on this in the chat?
So I can jump in quickly. So we haven't broken out from that structure, but I'm part of a roll up to HR. But okay, as part of this this initiative, I do have a steering committee that cuts across the organization. So the sponsors of that steering committee are CHRO, our CIO, as well as our executive that's over all of our internal corporate services. And then I have other members of the steering committee that includes people from strategy and corp comm and everything. So what I'm trying to do is get that alignment across all of these different parts of the organization, so that that it doesn't matter where I report to. It's that they're aligned. That yes, HR, IT, corp comm, we're all moving in the same direction. That yes, we want to create this better digital experience, and we want to do it together, and not on all of our one-off little things that we want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, because I think whenever build digital workplace steering teams or governance teams, I think the role is to try to use that as an opportunity to help them see the experience that their respective employees are having within their own business units. And I think that's usually what will align them, if you wish, in terms of the experience to be delivered, so that more and more the roadmaps for deploying digital platforms within those respective teams. HR will always need their own HR platforms. IT will have their service desk platforms. But how is that interaction managed from an employee perspective? And how do we design that experience so that it feels quite seamless and not a burden to achieve these tasks?
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Jay and Neil. This is where I've seen it work the best, is where you have that cross-functional steering group with C-level leadership that they ultimately own it, not one individual. It's not one individual department. And then having an operating team that actually does the nuts and bolts of running this thing. And again, making that a cross-functional team with ideally representation from as many diverse different groups inside the organization as possible. And for those to be people that have self-selected, they put their hand up and they've said, you know, I'm passionate and I care about this and I have a view. Those are the best people you can have on a working group that can really drive something forward. So that sort of operating model, rather than having it being dictated on by the IT team or by the HR team, always will work much, much better.
Neil, I think that you had the idea like of having a product management mindset, or, you know, looking at it from the point of view of creating a product when you're looking at DEX. Can you explain a bit about that, how that could maybe help with people when they're looking at this?
Yeah, sure. So I think what, you know, we spoke about before we had this call in terms of product management and looking at the digital workplace manager or the intranet owner role as more of a product owner, I think brings into kind of operational governance for how to manage the intranet. So why do we need the steering team? Because there are certain things that we have done and certain things we plan to do that we want to share with them. So how do you take that from a roadmap that you can work together as a intranet team to deliver certain new features and enhancements, test those to make sure that they work for the end users, and design it in a way that, you know, hopefully brings productivity. But you do need that, you know, product cycle, if you wish, of then being able to kind of report back to saying, okay, here's what we achieved with the improvements in the last 6 months, or whatever time frame that you're working with, and then using that to then communicate back to the steering, to then show that you can do good things, to then be able to go on to ask for more money, to do even more good things. So I think that's where, when you reach that stage of maturity of, wow, we really have something good and we know how to kind of incrementally improve on it, that then gives you that benefit of communicating to employees those changes and where that impact will have, you know, some benefits for them because you've actually tested it.
That's great. So basically what we're saying is we need to have that product management mindset and have a group of like cross-functional people from all these different, like, you know, maybe historical silos, and just give managers those sort of light bulb moments really, and those real-time examples that can let them or make them support it really and take that on. So that's excellent. So I think that's a really, really good point to finish on, and that's sort of summing up. And I'd like to really thank you all for your great stories, and also for coming in on these questions. And I'm sure we'll have more questions in the overtime sessions later today.